everyone, it's Ross, and today we're doing a video on a little bit of a grafting lesson for you guys. Now, this is a graft that was put on using the cleft graft, and you can see it's no longer on the tree. You know, we've got some pretty sizable growth here. We're talking 2 feet of growth. We have about 4 figs on here. I had pinched it again. We would have had more figs than 4, and this would have been a very successful variety for me this year, except for one problem that happened, and I want to share with you that problem. So if you look at the bottom here, so if you look at that bottom piece, let me put this down. I can use my hand to show you guys. So if you look at this piece here, this was the scion that I had stuck into the tree to graft it. And then this is the bud. It was a single node scion. And this bud came out and, you know, put all that growth on, right? Well, this bottom piece is what I want to look at and show you guys. So if you can imagine where the contact needs to happen on the graft. So all along this portion here is where the cambium is, where the green was. You know, that is the living part of the tree. You can also see that we made some solid connections here. But the problem was we didn't make great contact. And you can see that on each side of the graft, on this is, I guess we can call this the front, and this side here would be the back. You can see that there is 4 different points of contact. So you have one point of contact about here. This is roughly where it was, plus another point of contact here. That was number 2, and then you have, you know, 3 over here and then 4 over here, right? So that's a total of 4 points of contact, and depending on what type of graft you can use or what graft you are using, you'll have more or less points of contact, which create a stronger graft union, right? This is a very simple way of grafting, and that's why I like to use this graft. Now, let's say as an example, we can take off these leaves, get a better view. Let's say as an example that this side of the graft had taken and this side didn't. So when I'm talking about that, I'm talking that only half of the graft took, only 2 of the 4 points of contact took that we talked about, and that creates a problem, and you have just a poor center of gravity, right? So let's just say that this is hanging here and there's a tree underneath it, and it's kind of leaning towards this way, because the only part that is taken is this side right here, right? So we're leaning this way, and eventually if this becomes too heavy, it'll break. And that's exactly what had happened. This became too heavy. We had some wind last night, we had some rain last night, and this thing just broke. So because we don't have that good contact on both sides, this side here and this side, and we have at least 3 points of contact, if not 4, we're gonna have just a flawed graft. And from that point, you can make the assumption that because it's so flawed, that at some point it's gonna break. And that's just something we have to kind of deal with. I wish I would have figured that out sooner, because now I have to redo the graft, start over fresh from new, and it's, you know, we're already halfway through the season. So that in that respect, it's not that great, but there's a couple things you can do at this point. A few things you can do to start over. So we could find a node on this cutting here, because this is kind of hard, you know, this is hardened up, this is not, so we can't use that. But we could actually find a point on this cutting here that has a viable node, and we could make some cuts and regraft this. So this isn't totally a loss, right? I do have scion that I still have of this variety that I'm going to use instead of using this. But if you you were in a pickle and you were trying to preserve this variety, you could use this. You could also, as an example, we could have protected this graft in the way that I'm doing right now by using the tree tube. We could have staked it, and we could have set up a scenario where, even though this was a flawed graft, it was doomed from the start. We would need to protect it for at least a year or two, because it could actually work out, right? So say we only had the graft union had only taken on this side, and the whole thing was leaning this way. It's leaning in this direction, and this side never took. And this thing was doomed, right? Well, at some point, this is going to expand. This is going to expand, and this tree will eventually envelop this cutting, and they will become more of one. You know what I mean? So here's a graft as an example I can show you guys that has done really well. So this is my spy graft I did last year on probably Cadota, I think is the rootstock. And this thing, this is much larger up here, this is smaller, but over time they've grown together and formed an unusual shape, right? Here's another one here. And you can see that still part of this hasn't exactly enveloped the other. There's still some weakness in here, and it's over a year after I've grafted this variety. So you kind of get the idea here. We could have protected it as an example. We could have protected it for an entire year or for a period of time to give us a chance to air layer it, right? We could have grafted it, then air layered it and saved the variety. So there is some options and creative ways we could have got through this process and maybe have preserved and saved the variety. All is not lost from this point on. So I just wanted to make you guys blatantly aware of that even though this had happened to me, and this is probably going to happen to some of you guys if you're grafting as well, there are some other options. It's not completely over if you don't have good contact on both sides of the graft. So, that's the lesson today, guys. That's the grafting lesson. I hope that all made sense. I hope it was concise enough, because I know it's a little difficult to explain. But, again, we want to just make sure that we're getting contact on this side of the graft and this side of the graft. If there's 4 points of contact, we want at least 3 points of contact to form a strong graft union there. So, anyway, guys, that was the video, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Take care.